And officially, I would like to welcome you all to our webinar titled Creating Autism Friendly Museums. As many of you probably know, April 2nd marked World Autism Awareness Day, and that's why the month of April is dedicated to raising awareness and promoting acceptance. And here at Key Culture and Key Futures, our work is dedicated to sustainability in the cultural sector. And a really important part of that is, of course, accessibility and inclusion. And that's why we're very grateful to our two speakers today who will look at that in the space of autism and sensory-friendly museums. And now I'm delighted to get started and introduce you to our first speaker, Lisa. Lisa Jo Rudy is the mother of Tom Cook, a young adult on the autism spectrum. She began writing about autism in 2006 as the About.com guide to autism, and for several years was one of the top bloggers on the topic. Lisa is also the author of the book, How Families of Children with Autism or Asperger's Syndrome Can Get the Most Out of Community Activities. Her work on autism has appeared in multiple publications, including the New York Times and the Museum News. She is currently a consultant on autism and inclusion, and has worked with numerous museums and community organisations to set up and support inclusion programmes. She is currently serving as the lead advisor on a National Science Foundation funded autism inclusion project in Phoenix, Arizona area in the United States. So Lisa, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. I'm delighted to meet you, or virtually meet you anyway. I would just very quickly, so I am located actually in Cape Cod in Massachusetts, and I'm very excited to be talking to an international group because most of what I have done has been here in the US. And as mentioned, I'm the mom of a son who's now 27 years old. He is, I'd say, moderately autistic, but verbal and engaged, and we're very proud of him and all he has achieved. And I'd be delighted to answer questions both here, and if you want to reach out to me by email, you can do that as well. So I'm going to share right now my, hang on one sec, I'm just going to share a PowerPoint with you. And I want to talk to you both about autism and also about autism, specifically autism in the museum. This is something I've been involved with because I started out as a museum professional in the grant writing and general. I became a senior writer for the Franklin Institute Science Museum in Philadelphia, and then became a freelancer in the early 1990s, working with a lot of different museums. And when my son was diagnosed with autism, I realized that, well, as a writer, I could actually do research and at the same time start to make a little money on the side in that same vein. And so what's happened is that I've become a bit of a professional in that field and have been involved with it really since 2006. So I've been part of kind of an ongoing process of increasing awareness and changes in how autism is defined, which is kind of an interesting experience to have. I'm just gonna, okay. Just want to stop looking at this. There we go. So these are just some photographs of my son, Tom, mostly when he was a kid, being involved in museums. And he was clearly an autistic kid. There was no question of that. But we were able to include him in a lot of different museum settings, mostly because we had the opportunity to really get him into the museum for short periods of time and have him acclimate to it, so that by the time that he was probably 10 years old, he was a real museum kind of guy. I wanted to explain to you about autism. So before, autism has gone through a lot of different changes in how it's defined. For a period of time before 2013, there was something called autism spectrum disorders in the diagnostic manual. And these disorders included Asperger's syndrome, which you've probably heard of, but which no longer officially exists, which is sometimes referred to as high functioning autism. And then PDD-NOS, which could be high functioning, but also could be lower functioning, but might not fit the exact criteria of essentially autistic disorder, classic autism. And then there were 3 other disorders, all of which were under this autism spectrum. But in 2013, they put out a whole new diagnostic manual. And as a result, we now have one autism spectrum. So when you hear about people with autism, you are hearing about people with a huge range of differences and disabilities that go all the way from people who are quote unquote level 3, which may be somebody who's nonverbal, who might be self-abusive, might even be aggressive, all the way to somebody who is college educated, is married, has kids, but has certain symptoms that make it more difficult to operate successfully in specific situations. So that's a very, very wide range of people, which is important to know because unlike most disorders, it's very tough to sort of say people with autism and know exactly what you're talking about. This is something that's said very often. When you know one person with autism, you know one person with autism. And that's a reality, not only in terms of abilities and disabilities, but also in terms of specific behaviors or needs or challenges or abilities, because every individual is going to be unique. So I did my best here to create a diagram to kind of explain what that looks like, all these different uniquenesses. The core issue for people with autism are social and communication challenges. The difficulty with saying that is that could mean that completely unable to use spoken language, all the way to is having a hard time really distinguishing a joke from sarcasm. So that's a huge range. And there are people with autism who are extremely verbal, but yet will struggle with things like jokes or innuendos or idioms or other types of speech that are not straightforward and easy to understand, especially if they're in a cultural situation that is not their own. But in addition to these issues, one of the things that has become part of the diagnosis is sensory issues. Sensory issues don't necessarily associate with autism. There are plenty of people with sensory issues who are not autistic, but that can mean being very sensitive to bright lights, loud noises, heat, cold, lots of people around, all those types of issues. But it can also mean a craving for sensory input. So it could mean somebody who, just loves to hear the same sound over and over and over, or feel the same texture. So those are hyper and hypo sensory issues. Then intellectual challenges and differerences. There are people with autism who have very high IQs. Many have moderate IQs, and there's a large number who have lower IQs, and so they are intellectually challenged. But they also may have learning differences, so that the typical school type of learning, which is largely verbal, may not be appropriate for a person on the spectrum. They may do better with visual, oral, or hands-on learning, which is why sometimes museums are a great setting for people on the spectrum. They may also, by the way, have learning disabilities, and they may also have issues such as ADHD that are comorbid with autism, just to let you know. The splinter and savant skills and perseveration. This is where you'll see an individual who struggles in many ways, but has some extraordinary ability. For example, the ability to tell you that in the year 2045, the 14th of April will be a Tuesday. That's a splinter skill, which is, in other words, a skill that is a real skill, but doesn't necessarily have any association with anything else. What do you do with that information or that knowledge? So that can be a tough thing where somebody's able to do a thing, but not necessarily related to a bigger picture or the ideas surrounding it. And then perseveration is something that is really common among people with autism at all levels. And that includes also what's now sometimes defined as special interests. So a person who might want to talk only about the same thing over and over again, may know everything there is to know about a thing, but know very little about other things, and want to potentially share it all, or may potentially just want to stay in one place and do the same thing again and again and again, depending upon the level and the the situation. And the last thing on the list here is behavioral challenges. And again, none of these four sort of circles surrounding the middle are always found or always found at any particular level. Behavioral challenges are going to look very different, again, in different individuals. So you'll see some people with more profound autism who are behaving in surprising ways. They might be rocking or pacing or muttering. They might even become physically aggressive. That can happen. But you may also see behavioral differences just relating to conversation. You might see a person on the spectrum who asks questions that another person wouldn't ask, such as, for example, "Oh, I heard you were divorced. What's it like to be divorced?" Perfectly reasonable question, but for many people it would feel invasive. And that's the type of thing that is not meant to be invasive. It's just simply part of not quite understanding the social cues and how they work, what is or is not expected behavior. So again, it will vary a lot. I want to be quick here. I just wanted to show you, so this is actually American information, but these are just to show you that the diagnoses of autism have been rising like crazy since the 90s or even the 80s. And so the prevalence of autism is now at 1 in 36 as of 2023. More so for boys than girls, or men than women, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Just very quickly, as I've said, there's much broader criteria for diagnosis than there ever used to be. There's a lot more services available if you get a diagnosis. There's a lot more awareness of autism as a potential issue, and so there's better screening. We also think there may be possible cultural bias or environmental factors that lead to more autism diagnoses. It is possible that there are more cases of autism now than there used to be, but that's not entirely clear because the definition of it has changed so much since the 1980s. It's extraordinarily different from what it was. So we don't know for absolute sure about that. So what I wanted to talk to you about museums and autism. There are various levels of inclusion and access. And depending upon your budget, your mission, your support, you may choose to go at different levels to provide that kind of opportunity. So basic accessibility is the same kind of accessibility that you would provide for somebody who has mobility issues. You would provide a ramp. In basic accessibility for autism, you might provide a sensory map. You might provide sound canceling headphones. You might provide some quieter areas for people on the spectrum, so that if the museum becomes crowded, they have a place to quickly go to so they don't become overwhelmed. But as you start to rise up this ladder, one of the things that's become very popular is autism-only inclusive programs and events. Personally, I'm not a big fan because to me, they feel very segregated, but there are surprisingly, particularly if you're a children's museum or involve a lot of kids, parents in particular like these because they feel it's a non-judgmental situation. Autistic kids may not feel that or need that, but the parent very often will appreciate it. And there are some museums that provide those types of events even weekly, just every Sunday morning before the museum opens, we open for an hour just for our autistic and sensory people with sensory challenges. And you can come in and it'll be quieter and the lights will be down and you can stay if you want to or not stay. So that's, and of course, this month with the autism awareness, there's a lot of institutions that do an event specific specifically for autistic visitors. I think that's the most popular approach. Individual inclusion is something that happens quite a lot. My son had that experience because he had parents actually who were very museum oriented. He was fine. And the fact that he was autistic didn't trouble people at a certain point because he behaved in ways that were expected. But there are also ways to include individuals through everything from, oh gosh, there are programs out there that include autistic ambassadors to the museum, internship programs, opportunities for volunteerism, where individuals are supported because they have a particular interest in the museum and want to be part of it, but find it more challenging because of their autism. Partial inclusion would be essentially creating individual areas of the museum that are specific, or programs that are specific to people who have the same issues as autistic people. They may have ADHD, they may have sensory dysfunction, they may have learning differences, or they may be autistic, but those particular exhibits or programs have been built in such a way that they are accommodating, but they don't represent the whole museum. They represent certain exhibits, certain programs. So you might have a camp program that has a group that is specific for kids on the spectrum, or you might have an exhibit that has been developed to accommodate specific issues. And then full inclusion is basically, a museum that provides for all of those behavioral and personal differences across the board. And quite honestly, I think there are very, very few museums that do that at this point. Essentially, that would be universal design for inclusion, including those people who have not only physical, but also developmental differences, the neurodiverse population as a whole. That's kind of a goal. So one of the big questions that museums, when people say they want to be inclusive, I tend to ask first is, who do we include? And it's a question to ask yourself as an institution. Do you really want to include all people with autism? Because there is such a range. Do you really want to find a way to be inclusive of somebody who is nonverbal? Or is that not a goal? And looking at that and maybe talking to the autistic community locally would be a way to decide, are there limits to who you want to include and how effectively you hope to include them? Obviously, you guys are here because you think it is a good idea. So I just put the slide in here just to sort of talk about the fact that there are many autistic people probably on your staff, certainly among your visitorship. If you are a museum, particularly that a children's museum or science museum, a nature museum in particular, I'm sure you have many neurodiverse learners who come to you anyway. So not serving those people would be a shame, but also serving those people means that you're serving a lot of people who aren't officially diagnosed with a disorder, but who nevertheless have a wide range of differences that you will be accommodating as a result of accommodating autism. There are a lot of barriers to inclusion, and one of the biggest is going to be staff turnover. Training. You've trained everybody and now they leave. Competing priorities is a big one, especially financial priorities. There are fewer and fewer people worried about general visitors feeling uncomfortable with autistic visitors, but that can still happen. Particularly if you have some really outspoken visitors, it can be a problem. If you don't have enough people in a group, if you're running a program and it's one person leading it and no second person available, that can make it very tough. And particularly if you rely a lot on volunteers and you have people who are anxious about autism, aren't quite sure how to handle it, don't really want to do it, that can be a big issue. And then, just general lack of flexibility and imagination for any group of people can be an issue. There are some basic tools for universal access and inclusion. If you just do this, you will be making a difference. One of the toughest things is knowing, for people with autism, it is so helpful to know what to expect before you arrive. So if you can put online information about what to expect, preview videos, maps, anything that can help people to prepare, social stories, I'll talk about that in a second, to prepare for their visit, that will make a huge difference. Making wayfinding obvious. Don't assume that people will notice a small sign. And ideally, put something up there that tells people don't run, don't climb, or climb and run. But tell them what to expect and what is expected of them. The information, just a sheet that says sensory friendly times, galleries, and programs, and just handing it out so people know. If you can find a quiet space to retreat to, that's huge. Wheat and dairy-free menu options. There are a lot of people on the spectrum who do have gastrointestinal issues, and of course, lots of other people do too, so that's very helpful. And then giving your docents the tools to support autistic learners. Hands-on learning is huge. If you can use a cart or hands-on materials and have them around and allow the kids to touch, or even the adults to touch and engage with, even if you've got a museum that's mostly behind glass. And training your docents, telling them what to expect and what they can use, and if there's an issue, what to do about it. Although if you can do those things, you're 100% ahead of the game. These are just the basics. Having a sense of humor, flexibility, patience, creativity. Diplomacy is huge with parents and with other visitors who might be impatient or uncomfortable. A plan B, what do I do if there's a problem here? That's something that I really hope you guys will be thinking about. I'm realizing that I am running really late, Catriona. I'm going to go as fast as I can here.
You're okay. Take a few minutes and then we'll save questions till the end, probably.
Okay. You should be expecting the hands over the ears. You should be expecting hypersensitivity around light. You should be expecting strong reactions, need to move, that type of thing. These are some of the things that you should expect to see and be ready to accommodate at some level. These are just some suggestions. I think we're just going to have to share this with you for sensory issues, how to support people who are having these issues. It's not complicated. Quiet retreats, less messy or sticky experiences can make a big difference. You will experience some of these behaviors. You'll see immaturity. You'll see an older child behaving like a younger child. You'll see emotional outbursts that you would not expect from that person. You'll see somebody wanting to do the same thing over and over again. Somebody who doesn't want to play with the group or work with another person or aren't good at it. People wanting to do the same thing over and over again. And you may need to repeat and simplify your language when you're giving instruction or explaining something. Slow it down. Let's see. Right. So we've already kind of talked about this. You know what? I'm going to skip forward just a little bit because I think I've got too much information here. And we'll just share this with you, but these are just tips for being successful in your inclusion in programs and exhibits. And a lot of this really is telling people what to expect before they get there, asking people what they need before they get there, simplifying the information you share, offering options should there be a problem, trying to decrease the amount of sensory input as you can, or at least warning people if there's going to be a lot of it in a particular situation. And most importantly, knowing what you're going to do if there's a problem. So the bottom line here is that you can make a huge difference for autistic people and for people who are similar in terms of their neurodiversity by doing some very simple things. You can get a lot more complex if you choose to, and there's a lot of really kind of exciting and creative ways to do it. And if you do so, you're going to be reaching and helping a lot of people, not just people who identify as autistic. But also this slide I put in here because I just want museum folks to think about this question. What do you do if it works well? Because just having people come in and have an experience, as you know, is just having people come in and have an experience. How can you build on that? And if you have some ideas for including autistic people beyond a single museum experience, again, you're going to be 100% ahead of the curve. So I guess I'm leaving that out. And this is me. And this is my website, Autism in the Museum, and my email. And I will stop sharing so that we can move forward. And I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I think we could give you a full hour. There'd be lots to learn, but you shared your details there. And as you said, people will have a time for Q&A at the end, but people can reach out to you as well and find out more information about the work you're doing and how you can help. So thank you very much. And now I will introduce Maria, who is our second speaker. So Maria Cagney is the Curator of Education Outreach at the Hunt Museum in Limerick, Ireland since 2016. She has nearly 20 years of experience working in the cultural heritage sector, including 10 years in museum access and outreach. Over the last 2 years, Maria has been driving disability access and inclusion at the Hunt Museum, and late last year, working with the Irish charity As I Am, Autism Friendly Accreditation was secured for the museum. She has also led the delivery of Seeing Without Sight, an award-winning multi-sensory exhibition developed in collaboration with people with visual impairment. She is now leading the Inclusive Museums project at the Hunt Museum, and this places autistic people and visually impaired people at its centre, supporting them to identify the barriers that limit their access to and participation in the Hunt Museum initiatives, while also collaborating to find solutions or accommodations to overcome these. So Maria, I will just get your presentation ready to share and I will spotlight you.
Great, thank you, Katrina.
No problem. Okay, so there we go.
Right. Hello to everyone out there. Thank you for turning up this evening. I'm sure you're all here for Lisa and not for me, because like the rest of you here this evening, I'm trying to find my way in the world of autism here on behalf of the Hunt Museum. And I don't mind admitting in recent months it has been a bit of a learning curve. But anyway, listen, I'm happy to deliver or to share with you kind of the learnings that I found along the way. And I'll be referring to a specific project called the Inclusive Museums Project, which we're in the middle of right now. But my first slide there, Katrina, please. We are very committed here at the Hunt Museum to expanding access and inclusion for people with disabilities. However, we are a small cultural institution museum located right in the heart of Limerick City in Ireland. You know, we have between part-time and full-time staff, with about 13 staff. So, you know, in terms of our bandwidth to deliver, it's limited. So for that reason, we've had to prioritize two particular areas of disability, and they are autism and working with people with visual impairment. So the first slide there, it outlines kind of, you know, our first steps in expanding access and inclusion, specifically for the two groups, the autism community and the visually impaired community. So in 2023, we're very lucky to secure some funding from the Heritage Council here in Ireland, which allowed us to secure Autism Friendly Accreditation from As I Am, Ireland's autism charity, and also to deliver the Seeing Without Sight multisensory exhibition in collaboration with visually impaired persons. So Katrina, can I have the next slide there, please? This is what an Autism Friendly Accreditation cert looks like. We have this on display at the main gate into the museum and also at reception. It's also on our website. So it's a very important signifier to the autism community that you are welcome here in the Hunt Museum, and while we mightn't be perfect, we're doing what we can to meet your needs. So next slide there, Katrina. I should say I have a lot of visuals in this presentation that I plan to talk around, but only in a short number of them are kind of text heavy, so maybe bear with me, please. So what was involved in securing Autism Friendly Accreditation? Well, As I Am came to the museum and they completed a sensory audit of the building, including our galleries. Now there's a hyperlink in there. Katrina, I don't know if you're able to share our presentations at the end of, today or this evening or tomorrow. But if people were interested in knowing what the report looks like, this would give them an opportunity to see the kind of things that As I Am examined in terms of the building and the areas that they flagged. So just off the top of my head, I can tell you now that the cafe here in the museum was one of the red flag areas, because it's for someone with autism, it is a highly sensory area. There's the smell of food. There's the noise of chairs and tables and cutleries clattering. So that's one area we were advised to do a little bit of work in. They also advised us, it was a recommendation to identify a space in the museum where we could provide a quiet space. There are other things in there. We have our cabinets in the permanent collection are, they're brimming with objects. So for a person who without autism, it's quite tough going for someone to get through our galleries. It's just not possible to engage with every object. So for an autistic person, that number of objects, they just don't know where to start. So we're advised to think about pinning down our displays for that reason, and potentially even looking at creating sensory trails through the museum that could guide an autistic person to reduce the chance of them getting overwhelmed. Also, as part of the accreditation process, we completed autism awareness training with staff and volunteers. So I could say actually that we could do with a top up in that training at this point in time. It was delivered last summer, so we're not too far off, 12 months now. So that's something I'm actually talking to As I Am about. So we also drafted an autism friendly charter with As I Am, which sets out, how we plan to support the needs of the autism community. So that charter is heavily informed by the sensory audit findings, and it includes things like, we will make adjustments to the existing services we already provide so that we're providing increased levels of accessibility information on our website. So there is a hyperlink there. If you could open it, Katrina, please. Yeah, so that's a link to that section, to the accessibility section on our website. The top part of the information is quite general, but as you go down through the information, it's very specific to the autism community. I do not have time to walk people through it. And actually I have a couple of slides coming up that is going to share some of the content on that web page. Okay, so the charter also it states that we would provide, practical measures. So, for example, we have ear protectors available in our reception area if an autistic person wanted to access those. If we go to the next slide, Katrina, I have some examples of additional accessibility information that we provide on that webpage. So guys, I'm not sure how well known it is, and it's something Lisa touched on. When an autistic person is planning to visit somewhere new, they can experience quite high levels of anxiety. So what we have done, following advice from As I Am, is provide a series of resources on our website. Visual guides, as this is an example of a visual guide in this slide, which allows them to visualize the space, to see what kind of the spaces look like, and even whom they're going to meet along the way. So it reduces their anxiety. They don't have to be fancy at all. They're like little stories. We've just kind of chosen to use a kind of cartoon format in some of the ones that we have developed. right? This is just one first floor and second floor, just visuals. We go to the next slide, please. We've also produced sensory maps. So they're broken down. You can see the icons there. So hearing, smell, if there's a lot to see, for example, if they're at risk of overstimulation. They're very simple. We produce these in-house. Next slide, please, Katrina. We've also, over the summer, and it's something we need to get back to, we delivered quite a number of autism-friendly events. So as part of kind of the booking process, every family that booked in, we shared with them the social story that was produced for the event that they had booked into. And there we have another hyperlink, which gives you an idea of the types of information that we put in the social story. It's, you know, they get to see photographs of the facilitators, the people they'll meet and be working with in the course of, well, this workshop, a little description, the types of materials that they'll be working with, the level of support that will be available, the spaces that will be used for the workshop. Very, very simple stuff, all produced in-house, just a very, very simple PDF. So if we go to the next slide, please, Katrina. We're also working on, as I said, getting a quiet space in the museum. It was one of the recommendations that came out of the audit completed by SIM. We are a small institution and space, we do not have any spare space. So we had to think outside the box with this one. So we have a space, it's under a stairs, but there's standing heights for an autistic adult that might want to use the space, and the space under the stairs itself, it's actually quite a fun space for children, potentially fun for a child to spend time in the space. And it's going to look like that once it's, there has been a delay with getting it installed, but hopefully by the end of the month, it'll be in place. Next slide, please, Katrina. Just to touch on, I mentioned the Seeing Without Sight project and exhibition there at the start of my presentation, and I have this in here because it's important maybe to talk about it in context of providing inclusive multisensory learning opportunities in a museum context. Here we have a photograph of Anya May, one of 4 visually impaired and blind people that I worked with over the course of about 18 months. She was very, very lucky to get the opportunity to get hands-on with this beautiful maquette. A maquette is a miniature design. In this instance, it's a miniature design of a gown created by wonderful dress designer, Irish dress designer, Sybil Connolly. So I'll tell you a little bit more about Anya May's involvement in the Seeing with Sight project in a moment. If we just go to the next slide there, please, Katrina. Yeah, so the Seeing Without Sight project, it ran for about, I suppose we did 12 months of workshops. Anya May was one of 4 visually impaired co-creators that we worked with. And the whole point of the Seeing Without Sight project was to work with visually impaired people to develop new and innovative ways that they could access and enjoy the collection and participate in the collection in the same way as a seeing person can. So touch, sound, all these things, these sensory experiences became really, really important in facilitating that. Over the course of the 18 months, we explored 35 objects in the collection to touch, and worked with volunteers in the museum and the co-creators to develop audio descriptions, written-based descriptions following the audio description format for each of the objects. And out of the 35 objects, our co-creators actually selected their 9 favourite objects. And we then trained them and coached them on performance of those audio descriptions. Those were recorded and presented in an exhibition, the exhibition called Seeing Without Sight. The wee device there, the pink device, some of you here from museums will possibly be familiar with this little, it's called a museum in a box. And ultimately, there's a 3D printed object just sitting on top of it there, but the device actually can scan the 3D object. There's a little sticker on the bottom of the 3D object, and the device then emits audio. So in the case of Seeing Without Sight, we use this device to share audio descriptions that had been completed by our visually impaired co-creators. And I could talk at length about the challenges that were involved in, working with them to deliver those audio descriptions. I mean, if you can't see text for a start, how can you perform it? So I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole today, but just to say, if you go to the next slide, please, Katrina. Yeah. These are some of the 3D printed objects that we presented alongside the audio descriptions and the original 9 objects that they were responding to. The exhibition was truly multisensory in every way. We worked through with our co-creators. We found various accessibility kind of design solutions that will make the exhibition accessible for visually impaired people. But in doing that, we actually created an exhibition that enriched the experience for everyone, because it's multisensory. They were exploring through sight, through touch, and through the audio component of the exhibition. And in addition, there were also large format labels, and label text for the objects were also printed in Braille as well. If you go to the next slide there, please, Katrina. There were 2 phases of the exhibition. This is what the second phase of the exhibition looked like. The panel on the wall there, it was created following kind of universal design principles. And it actually worked in conjunction with screen readers as well. That was the way it was designed. If you go to the next slide, please, Katrina. So literally from smallies right up to the elderly, everyone enjoyed this exhibition, and really was enriching for visitors in every way to the museum. But I just want to show you one little boy on the second last day of the exhibition. He came as part of a school group. He was one of 5 autistic children in the school group. And the reason they were there was because actually there was a little boy called Christopher who was blind. And when the teacher contacted me, it was with Christopher's needs in mind. But as it turned out, the 5 autistic children got a huge amount of value out of the exhibition. So the link down low, Katrina, you might open that for me, please. Thank you. The reason I'm showing you this is because you can see the 3D print of the maquette that featured there in an earlier slide. Anya May was exploring it through touch. But our friends in Lisburn Museum up in Northern Ireland kindly recreated the pleated linen that Sybil Connolly used to produce the First Love gown design. The 3D prints, they're basically 3D printed in plastic, and they don't convey the beautiful light and delicate and even ethereal qualities of the linen. So our friends in Lisburn made this sample of pleated linen so people could really kind of really get a sense of what it would feel like to touch the original object. And this little boy, he sat there for 20 minutes exploring and just enjoying the texture and the tactile experience that little resource provided. Would you just go to the next slide, please? How am I doing in time? Okay. That's great. Just a little bit about inclusive museums. We've been really, really lucky to get funding through Rethink Ireland's Disability Awareness and Participation Fund, participation fund, and it's allowing us really to continue our journey to make the museum more accessible and inclusive for the autism community and the visually impaired persons. There are quite a number of strands to this project, but at a top level, you know, I said about it's allowing us to continue our audio description work with visually impaired co-creators so that we can create more content, similar to what you've just experienced in the Seeing Without Sight exhibition. We're delivered training in digitization for autistic persons. So in a museum context, I'm talking about 3D digitization. So that's where autistic people are getting the opportunity to work with laser scanners, that kind of equipment, and processes that we use to create 3D digital replicas of our collection objects, and they're all available on Sketchfab. We're also providing 6 months of paid employment for an autistic person. So last week, we were interviewing candidates for this role. I'll talk about it a little bit more in the next slide in a moment to give you a little bit more insight on what was involved in that. We're also in the middle of setting up 2 working groups whom we're going to be working with to identify barriers to participation here in the museum. But moreover, we're going to be collaborating with them to find solutions or accommodations to these barriers. So as I said, there are 2 working groups. The first one is an autistic person's working group, and the second one is a visually impaired person's working group. The next slide, please, Katrina. Yeah. So this is what digitization looks like. They're actually operating. This is Dermot. The guy in the stripy shirt is called Dermot, and one of the staff here in the museum has actually coined this process, dermatization, because he's such an expert at what he does. So since the middle of February, 3 young men, kind of in their early 20s, have been accessing training in digitization with Dermot. So here they are, they're learning about how to operate the laser scanner, and they're actually scanning a little memento mori object, and you can see a 3D image of that up on the screen. And the next slide, please. They've produced 2 3D models since they joined us in February. I've just a couple of visuals and links in there that you can look at them in your own time if you like. They have found the process hugely rewarding. I mean, they're coming at this with an existing interest in technology and gaming, and they have gotten such a tremendous amount out of learning about digitization. And it's, you know, from the time I met them, I've seen their confidence grow and grow. Last week, we spent some hours in our local Fab Lab, design makerspace. It's part of the University of Limerick, and they got their first experience in 3D printing. So they printed little chess pieces, and we're delighted to even bring that much home. But next week, sorry, not next week, tomorrow, my God, they're actually going to be printing the little memento mori, which is the skull, like gold colored object up top there. Next slide, please, Katrina. Yeah. So, you know, in terms of making our staff and our volunteering teams more neurodiverse here and inclusive in the museum, these working groups are very, very important. Disability, I suppose it has been a challenge connecting with the right people to gain membership or to build membership in the autistic person's working group. Disability services at UL have been brilliant. Autism studies in the University College Cork have been excellent, as I am. There's an autism research project in University of Limerick. All of them have worked behind the scenes to help find us members. The sensory audit that I've mentioned a few times, completed by As I Am, it's going to inform the work of this group. The first meeting is due to take place on April 17th. we will be encouraging members of this working group to actually work with staff and volunteers to help to work with us to co-produce digital learning resources that we can share with other museums across Ireland and possibly even further afield. The resources will share their experiences of the daily challenges they face, but also the resources will track our journey, the working group journey, what we learned, what were the barriers that we identified and the steps we took to overcome these. Just to let you know, we are still looking for more members. So if you know anyone, any autistic person living in the Midwest of Ireland, you might let them know about our project. Just also to say on digitisation training, these participation opportunities are going to be available until August. So again, if you know anyone, autistic person would like to get involved, do share information with them. And I think that is, yeah, I just included this, we quote at the end, an artist friend of mine who is autistic. Actually, just I came across it in context of her work recently, and it's by Magda Mustafa, who's a pioneer in autism design. And she said, you design better from the center when you learn from the margins. And I think that links very closely, Lisa, to what you were saying about the importance of universal design and trying. If something is designed well, any product or experience is designed well with people's needs in mind, there's a greater chance that it'll be enjoyable and accessible for the large majority. So that, also my contact details are there if anyone would like to reach out to me.
Thank you very much, Maria. It's great to see how much work that you're all doing in the Hunt Museum and such a variety as well in the various practices. I know, do you need to leave now or can you answer a question?
I can answer a question.
Okay, because I had one or two questions come in, and Lisa, this will also be applicable for you to answer as well. So someone asked, how do you know if there is a demand for autistic programs for children and adults in your community? Because I know you've implemented a few of them in the Hunt Museum.
We have, we worked very closely with St. Gabriel's Foundation here in Limerick, who actually, they provide support services to children, autistic children with quite complex needs. It was a part of their summer camp even, some of the events we delivered, but we did get an awful lot of inquiries. The willow artworks they produced were in the garden. There was a little bit of signage and some inquiries. Front of house staff did take some inquiries about future autism friendly programming. So we haven't managed to get back to that yet, but at the moment the focus of inclusive museums is actually autistic adults as well, but it is very much still, you know, on the agenda to get back to the autism friendly programming for families.
Fantastic. And if you have one more second before you go, and then Lisa will stay with us to answer some questions. Todd has asked in the chat why the 3D digitization or printing specifically. How did that project come about? We've
been doing it since 2018 here at the museum. So it was part of how we operate as a museum. That's why.
And then you just, I guess,
we had the knowledge internally and the equipment internally. It was a good fit for us. That's why.
And I think that's a great example as well to show that whatever resources or programs you're already working on, you can adapt them to be more inclusive and welcome more people.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the accommodations, often there's virtually no cost associated with them. It's about changing how you offer your service. You know, often there's very, very little cost involved. We were doing this anyway and would be doing it even if the Inclusive Museum project wasn't in operation.
Fantastic. Thank you, Maria. I know your building is going to lock up, so you might need to leave us.
I'm very, very sorry I have to run or I'll be sleeping here. Okay.
No problem. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you.
And as I said, Lisa is kind of going to stay with us for a few moments. So I ask you to share your questions in the chat, and she'll be able to answer them. But I wanted to let you all know that we are organizing another event on Tuesday next week at the same time, April 16th. And it will be a workshop where we go a bit more into depth and have space for discussion. And our team have been researching as well examples from museums around the world, where we'll be able to produce a mini booklet with all of that. And we'll go through that in the workshop as well. The only issue is that we only have 20 spaces for the workshop because it is interactive. So if you would like to join us, you can send us an email. I will put our email in the chat, and it'd be great to see more of you there next week. And now, Lisa, I already have some questions for you. I don't know if you want to touch on the previous question first that was asked about how do you know if there's a demand for implementing specific programs?
Well, given that there's 1 in 36 kids who are autistic, there's a pretty good chance there will be some demand just in a general way. Here in the US, I would certainly recommend reaching out to the school district to ask about school trips and that type of situation. But also, reaching out here at least to, or I guess in the UK in general, to the national organizations to see if they have local chapters. Here we have the Autism Society, which has local chapters, and they can certainly give you some insight, as well as any kinds of clinics or service centers. Those are all good sources for connecting and learning more about what the need is and what the interest is. Parent groups as well.
Fantastic, thank you. And there was another question asking, are museums advised to include a private quiet area for autistic visitors who might have a panic attack and need alone time to regulate and recover? And I know people are often concerned about providing a specific space if they say they already are working in a very small building. So if you could speak on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Obviously, everybody's, there are a variety of different ways to do it. If you're specifically serving children, or even one thing that people have sometimes done is actually put in a pop-up tent, which is not ideal and perfect, but it just gives you the sensation of being separated, which can be helpful to a lot of people. It's ideal. I mean, that's the ideal, is to have some place that, and it's not just autistic people. Museums can be very sensory overwhelming for a lot of people. I mean, I'm sure you've seen little kids get overwhelmed in museums. It's just a lot to take in all at once. So if you can do something like that, it's wonderful. Even if it is, even if you're just saying, you know what, for example, in natural history museums, often there are dioramas, and very few people like the dioramas because they're not highly interactive and loud and exciting. And just saying this is a quiet area is helpful.
Yeah, that's I've also seen, people they know a quieter part of their museum where they can take people to, so that's really helpful as well. So if there's anyone at any point who wants to unmute and ask a question as well, you can work away. But I was wondering as well, Lisa, if there's people here today who want to start implementing some of these practices and they're wondering about how to get started, is there specific people within their museum that they should involve in this? Like, do you recommend forming a team? Is there anyone who is particularly helpful to get action in motion?
You need leadership. You need somebody who is going to champion this from a budget end. If you don't have anybody in leadership who thinks this is a great idea, it's going to be very tough to implement it. So, if you have a member of the board who has an autistic grandchild, if you have, you're going to have people probably on your staff who either are autistic or have autistic children or grandchildren. Getting those people involved is a good way to just ensure that you're going to have support. But then in terms of building programs, it really depends on what you want to do. If you're looking at basic accommodations, and obviously your frontline staff are going to be important. You're going to need to talk to whoever is managing the exhibits themselves to look at ways in which you might be able to do accommodations, so exhibit people. If you are looking at providing maps and so on, now you're really talking about, visitor services. If you're talking about programs, you need to talk to your education staff. So it really will vary depending on the direction you're going. But I think really most key is going to be leadership who are going to support this idea throughout, as Maria clearly has done, and visitor services, who are the first people that you're going to interact with. Then again, one other area of expertise that could be very helpful is if you have people who are involved with your website and or digital materials, people who can upload videos, create videos, that type of thing for previews is also very helpful.
Thank you. And Sherry is asking, do you have any suggestions for grant funding in the US?
Oh yeah, well, the National Science Foundation seems to be very gung-ho. I would say all the federal agencies are. Those are more competitive grants, but they're the big ones. So that's definitely a direction you can go in. Specifically for autism, there are a few foundations that are supportive. One is the Fiddle Foundation, I mean, there's several of them that are, Autism Speaks provides some funding for this type of project. But typically, you're probably, if you're a smaller institution, looking at your regional or even state programs, both could be your cultural council, your state cultural council, your town cultural council. All of those are institutions that may very well be willing to support. And you may even find that there are some corporate institutions that are willing to support either financially or within kind support. Sometimes I've seen volunteer groups come from corporations on for a particular event, or in-kind donations made in the form of anything from, sound blocking headsets to computers.
And I've seen that, there are things you can do also without funding. Of course, if you want to do the higher level things, you can get funding. But I think, as you mentioned, there's some of the starting things, and Maria mentioned it as well, that you can do a lot of things in-house that you could get started with, for example, a sensory map, and sharing more information. So they're also a great step, maybe while you try to look for funding.
Well, that and I mean, honest to goodness, I've never understood why so few museums create preview videos for everybody. They're just very useful tools, and all you need to do is run around with a cell phone and kind of show off, well, this is, when you walk in, here's what you'll see, and here's what you'll experience, and here are your options. And, we hope you'll be here, and turn it off, upload it, you're done. So it's a very simple, low cost kind of way to provide support, not just for autistic visitors and their families, but for families in general, for teachers,
Yeah, because I think a lot of the practices, even if they're implemented for an autistic group in mind, the wider audience benefits as well. So it benefits your entire community and audience at the same time.
Well, if you think about the number of people who are considered neurodivergent, which would be everybody with autism, ADHD, Tourette's, anxiety disorder, OCD, learning disabilities, you're coming up to a quarter of the people in the world.
Yeah, it's a big group. And if anyone has any last questions, you could put them in the chat now. But I just want to ask you in the meantime, Lisa, about the importance of working with a local autism organisation or charity in getting their expertise and knowledge. Is that one of the starting points, or how do you recommend people go about that?
It is a good idea. There is a very strong desire within most disability communities to ensure nothing about us without us. On the other hand, it is important, I believe, to be representative, not just of people with autism, but of kind of a broader range of people with autism. And it is quite possible to wind up designing for a particular person or a couple of people who happen to have raised their hands, and then discover that it isn't really relevant to the larger larger group of people. So while including people on the spectrum is very important, it's also important to be aware, depending on the type of institution you are, that you're designing for your likely visitors, which might be school groups, which might be institutional groups of some sort, or it might be families with autistic kids who also have kids who are typically developing. So yes, it is important, but it's not the only important thing to think about as you're creating. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Because there's a lot of voices, and the quote that you shared I thought was really good, where it says, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one person.
Well, I mean, I was in a situation where, a pair of parents worked very, very hard with the school district to create an autism support classroom specifically for their children, which was completely inappropriate for my son. And I had to then fight to not have him included in the special autism support program because they happened to be very bright kids on very high end of the spectrum who are very into math. And my son is moderately autistic and very into stories and art. And so therefore the program just didn't work for him at all. And that makes this particular area particularly challenging because of the diversity. Yeah.
Yeah, so then on that aspect, I guess, is it just kind of start and then depending on feedback you get, because I guess it's hard to cater to absolutely everyone starting off, and then you'll start to get feedback. And how do you recommend museums incorporate that? Because everyone, as you said, has a different experience. So
Right.
how do they take that feedback on?
I mean, a lot of what Maria was describing, I think, is universally going to be useful. I think there's a lot you can do that is going to be useful to everybody across the board. And that's going to be not necessarily the easiest, but I think the first layer to implement. And I don't think you're going to get negative feedback on that. Things like providing sensory maps, preview information, sound blocking headsets, all those types of things are very straightforward. And I don't think anybody's going to have an issue with it or say it isn't really serving my needs. But yes, I think, you're going to have somebody say, great, you want to do this. This is the type of program I want to see. And you create it. And maybe it serves a smaller group than you anticipated. And maybe you need to expand it or tweak it. Absolutely.
Thank you, Lisa. We haven't had any last questions come in, so I guess we can wrap it there. I don't know if you have any final takeaways that you want to share to the group today, because we still have a lot of people with us.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, here's the thing that I'd like to share. I sort of have a little bit already, and that is to say that over the last 10 years, I would say that autism has become part of a larger group of people, which is to say autistic individuals who are moderate to higher functioning have become part of a larger group, which we are now describing as neurodiverse. And that means that we're not just looking at a diagnosis, we're looking at a set of either learning or behavioral or sensory differences that expand to a much larger range of human beings. And so while I applaud people's interest in autism specifically, I think it's worthwhile to think about, well, could this also serve somebody who's dyslexic? So in other words, a person with autism very often will have difficulty taking in and making meaning out of complex written material. But so might a person with ADHD, and so might a person with dyslexia, and so might a person with intellectual disabilities, and so might, a mother who's got two little kids dragging at her and pulling. And so see what I mean is that same approach, simplifying labels or providing information in multiple formats, or providing previews can serve a much broader range of people. If you think about making cuts in the sidewalk to serve people in wheelchairs, and then realizing, oh my goodness, that also serves people who have strollers and people who have bad knees and people who have all kinds of other issues that you never thought of when you created that accommodation. So just something to think about.
I think that is a great note to finish on. I saw someone was unmuting. I don't know if they have a question they want to ask before we finish up. I'll just give a moment. Okay, maybe not. But thank you, Lisa, for joining us this evening. I know Maria has gone, but thank you to Maria as well. It's been a great hour to learn and get insight from both of you on this. I also want to say thank you to our team of volunteers in Key Culture who have been doing fantastic work to help with research and designing items and helping create resources as well. So I want to say thank you to Alina Rohr, Matilda Danny, and Yates Lynn. And finally, thank you to everyone who has joined us here this evening. We still have a lot of people on, so people are obviously very interested in this topic. And I hope, well, I know you've probably learned a lot from this evening, but I really hope that you can take something that you've learned and turn it into action, not just to forget about this hour this evening. And yeah, figure out how we can actually make culture more accessible and make sure we're including everyone, because this is a space for everyone. So thank you, all of you, for coming. And thank you very much again, Lisa.
Thank you, Katrina. It's been a pleasure. And thanks everybody for coming. Feel free to reach out.
Yeah, and Lisa, you're going to share your slides, I believe.
Yeah, I'll send it right over to you now.
Yeah, perfect. So I will send out an email to everyone who's registered so that they can get all of the content as well. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your morning, evening, afternoon, wherever you are in the world.